Hey guys, in this next workshop, I'm going to show you how we can encapsulate business logic in our domains. And as part of this, I'm going to introduce you guys to the basics of rich domain modeling. This is, of course, quite foundational to methodologies like DDD or domain driven design, but it is still very common and useful in even very anemic applications, and therefore useful for most teams. So let's jump right in. I'm going to start by focusing on the order over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click the order, create a new operation by clicking add operation, and I'm going to call this ship. And the whole idea here is that instead of setting the status to shipped and checking all of the invariants inside of our application layer, inside of our services, from the outside, we can encapsulate all of that logic directly inside of our domain, inside of a ship method, for example, a ship operation. And this is a great way, by the way, to contain and control complexity. We can essentially have the rules of our business in appropriate places throughout our domain. And this is a great tenet for us to firstly control this complexity and also to make our applications very testable. So there is a lot of value in heading down this approach. And this is essentially what the purpose of today's video is, to show you guys how we could do this. All right, so that's the ship. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Control Enter shortcut. And what that's going to do is create another operation. You guys are very familiar with that shortcut, I'm sure by now, and we'll call this cancel. And what I can do for the cancel is I can also add additional parameters. So we'll just add a simple parameter for now. We're going to call this the reason. And I'm going to make this a nullable parameter over here by selecting the is nullable. The last thing we could do here, or the last example I want to give you guys, is I can also, using the Control Enter shortcut again, I can create another operation. We're going to call this get total. So in this case, we are going to be fetching information out of our domain. And I'm going to tab over to the return type, which we will set as a decimal. And so here we have our ship, our cancel, and our get total, which is a decimal. Now, the one thing I can mention here is, of course, we're going to want to persist the cancellation reason, which we can do by adding another attribute to our order over here, the cancellation reason, for example, and we can make this nullable. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to remove this for now, just for today's video. This would be typically what you would do so that you can capture this information. But because this is going to force us to do another migration and slow us down for the video, we're not going to do it today in this particular video. But feel free to keep that in there and to set that appropriately when we get to the business logic. All right, so let's say save at this stage. Software Factory is going to run. We could bring up the changes, and we've got our order over here with our new operations, our methods inside of our order entity, which we can go and implement. To implement this, we can say apply changes, and we can right click on the order, and we can say open an IDE, and we can head over to our entity order.cs file. All right, so here's our ship. And what we could do is we could start to implement the business logic here. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set the status to shipped. That's quite obvious, but maybe we also need to check certain invariants as part of the business rules here. So for example, we could say if the status is not equal to placed, we can say that we will throw a new invalid operation exception, cannot ship this order. All right, so that's just a very simple example of us enforcing certain domain invariants at this point. So you can't actually ship the order unless it is already in the placed status. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy this logic, and let's move on to the cancellation. Let's say that we have this rule applies for the cancellation too. We'll just change our status here to canceled, and we'll say we cannot cancel this order. And I can set that. So this is, I'm going to put as a to-do to set the cancellation reason. So this is something, as I mentioned, that you guys can do outside of this video if you'd like, just to know that that's there. But just to keep things efficient, we're going to skip that step for now. All right, last we're going to do over here is we're going to implement the logic for the get total. That's just quite simple maths for us to do here. So we'll just go and take the order lines and sum out essentially the units multiplied by the unit price. And we're going to remove the discount, and I'll put that in parentheses because the discounts could be null in our system. All right, there's our business logic. Very simple for now. Any rules that we want to encapsulate in here, we can. This, of course, can be taken much, much further, and that's really the idea of DDD, is it incorporates other patterns, things like domain eventing and domain services, to really take this idea much, much further so that we can ensure that our domains never go into invalid states and that all of our business rules actually do exist in our domains. Okay, so next what we could do is jump back to Intent Architect. I just wanted to check there. We do need to save this file. All right, that's saved. And we can come back to our services and we can come and see that our ship order command, which we created in one of the previous videos, is available for us. And we can just shift this over to calling the ship operation. And we can go and right click it and click on the map entity update. And what you can see that that does is it really restricts what we can do from an updating perspective, a mutation perspective on this order to just the ship, which we can double click over here and we can say done. And so we can then trust when we see this relationship here that this is calling just that operation over there. Let's do the same for the cancel. So we'll need to create a separate command for the cancel. So I'm just going to select the ship order command and say Control Enter, and we can call this cancel order command. And I can create a relationship, an update relationship here directly to the cancel, which we could just double click on the cancel and double click on the reason. It's going to set up that property for us over there, and we can say done. And the last thing we can do here is we can just expose this as an HTTP endpoint. And if you guys recall from earlier, the updates will by default filter for the entity type by its surrogate key. So in this case, the ID is already available for us inside of the root, right? So it's already passed into this command. Next, we want to focus then on the order DTO. I'm going to just control click to that. It's going to take us to the order DTO inside of our model over here. And we can also go back to mapping from the domain, in which case we can select that get total operation from the order entity, and we can say done. And that's going to add this additional field over here, which we can just rename to total, right? Just using the F2 shortcut there. And we can say save, Software Factory is going to run. And here we can see all of the changes that it wants to bring in. I think the only things that are really worth pointing out here is that the order DTO mapping is going to fetch out the total from our get total operation. The command handler for the cancellation is going to call the cancellation over here. You'll notice that there's no save over here, as I'm sure you guys have already seen as part of this clean architecture using the mediator pattern. The default implementation is going to add a unit of work behavior as part of the pipeline. So the saves are called automatically and not something that you really have to concern yourself with in terms of the business logic. That is an option. You can also make sure that all of your saves are very, very explicit. That's really a preference for teams to choose between. And that is controlled in the settings, just by the way. All right, we can go ahead and say apply changes. All of that code is now in the system, and we can compile this application and we can test out the system. So the one thing I could just mention as this is compiling is that I did go and add some data for us to work with in between the last video and this video. So we do have some data to already work with. We've got a customer, we've got some products, and we've got a couple of orders. So let's start by fetching out the orders that are in the system. You can, of course, go and create your own orders with different line items and things like that, and you will see the same happening over here. We can try this out, and we could say we're going to take the first page with the page size of 10, and we can execute this. And we've got 2 orders in the system. And here's our first one. It's to a John Smith. And John Smith is essentially ordering 2 of the Brave New World books. And the unit price for that book is a 16.99 euro book or pound or whatever the case is, whatever currency our application has been built in. And there we can see our total is being calculated appropriately and correctly. Same for this one. This is another one by John Smith, quite unsurprisingly. And here we can see that he's ordering Brave New World again and Lord of the Rings. And there we can see that the total is being calculated correctly. So we can see that this is already helping us with capturing, you could say, calculated fields and things like that. It makes a lot of that very, very simple for us to do. Next, what we can do is we can check out let's just go grab the ID over here. Just going to grab this ID of our top order over there, and we can check out how it would work if we wanted to ship this order. So we can head over to the put, which is a ship, and we can try it out. Paste an ID over there, say execute. We're going to get a 2 of 4 because there's no response really coming back, but that is a success code. If we had to execute it again, notice that we hit our exception immediately. So here, our business rules are being enforced. You cannot ship this order again. If it's not in a placed status, we cannot ship it. So we're getting this exception. And if we just F5 our way out of this, it's just going to run through the whole pipeline all the way up to our controller entry point. There it is. for the ship, we can say F5, and there's our stack trace. Now, this is just something I can mention here is that stack traces like this only appear here in our API if we are in development mode. If we are in production, these will not be supplied, right? We will have to supply our own problem details if we want to actually get some information out of this. So we do not expose the stack trace. That is for security reasons. All right, guys, the last thing I want to just quickly show you here as part of this particular workshop is we can also add constructors into our domain. And this is great because it can also help us enforce certain rules and invariants when we are creating entities and aggregate routes in our system. So we're going to go ahead and right click on the order, and I'm going to add a constructor over here. And there's a neat little trick that we can use in Intent Architect, which we can where we can right click and say map constructor. And here we can select the fields that we want to set from the constructor. So we can have the order number, for example, the customer ID, and maybe the order lines as an example. And we can say done. And that's going to essentially wire all of that up for us. And the other thing that we can do inside of the domain, which is also very useful, is we can just set a lot of the default values here. For example, the status, we can set this order status to be placed by default. And for the order date, we can do the same here as we did in the services. We can have the date time.utc now. That'll be set for the date time. We could say save and head over to our services now. Now, what you can see happens in the services is immediately you can see there's the red line that's popping up over there, but we've also got this error. If we click on the error, it's going to take us to where this error has occurred. And if we click on the error again, it'll offer us an opportunity to click on the go to error button over here, and this is going to take us to where the error actually is. So we can just follow along to where the error is whenever we see them. And here we can see that the error in this case is that we can no longer use the object initialization approach to creating this order because we now have a constructor. So we must remove this mapping. So I'm going to remove it, and we can just double click on the order, double click again, and we can double click one last time, and it's going to go set all of these fields again. The one thing that it did do is it did add the discount back in here. We may want to remove that as we did earlier, or keep it. It's completely up to you, and depending on how the business would want this system to work. So that's really just to keep in line with what we did in the past. I'm going to remove the discount over there. All right, so we can say done. That's going to resolve our error. We can say Control S or save and bring up the software factory. And here we can see our changes coming in. We can see our constructor as well as all of our initialized fields being set. We've got our create order command handler that has now been updated to use the constructor, right? The order line is still using an anemic constructor, so we can go and add a constructor to this if we really wanted to. But quite simply, this is now using the constructor on the order as opposed to the object initialization syntax. You'll notice, by the way, that we no longer need to set the UCT now and the status inside of our application layer, if you want to think about it like this. Those are now being set directly inside of the domain. So it's all part of capturing the rules of our system directly inside of our domain. We can, of course, add these rules into the constructor itself too. Great, guys. That's really what we want to cover as part of today's workshop. I hope that this has been insightful, and please give us a comment and let us know what you guys think. And until the next one, cheers.